holds a master's degree in public administration from USC, where her graduate research includes developing national policies on school violence prevention and incentivizing resilient infrastructure technology adoption. Her research interests span from across sectors, connected by a passion for system improvement through program design, evaluation, and behavioral insight. Wang holds a bachelor's degree in psychology from Pepperdine University, where she specializes in experimental and industrial organizational appliances. Sorry about that. So I feel honored to present to you Ivana Wang, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Lindsay, for the introduction, and hello, everyone. Thank you for joining today's meeting. Also, thank you to Cameo for having me today to talk about a topic that I'm really passionate about and I'm really excited to share. So like Lindsay said, my background is both in psychology and policy, and I love exploring the different ways to merge the two through applied research. So today's presentation, we'll be looking at how behavioral science is relevant to small business technical assistance, or TA, and what modern insights can be applied to help improve our existing programs and also your client outcomes in a culturally competent way. And so some high-level goals you can see even just from the title are modernizing technical assistance, applying behavioral science and nudges, and also improving outcomes for minority-owned small businesses. And you all know that the ecosystem is much larger than this slide right here, but in order to improve the system, we have to understand it, and that means breaking it apart in order to put it back together again. And so this is the most basic definition. With primary actors, you have your range of services, which can be anything from developing a business plan to exporting, marketing, PR, accounting assistance. You have your service providers, like everyone here in this room, and you have your clients, which are the reachable population. Next slide, please. Yes, and in doing our research, we found a number of common barriers. For instance, from the client side, having low financial literacy, maybe inexperience in running a business, or lack of banking relationships, and also how that relates to the provider side and their ability to make the most of their resources for their client, whether it's limited engagement or learning to gain trust, empathizing and understanding culture. In 2016, we had a partnership for lending in underserved markets project, which we call the Plum Project. And from that, we learned that there are some opportunities in this space. The Plum Project demonstrated, that technical assistance can be effective in expanding access to capital if it's tech-enabled and data-driven, if it's supportive of place-based investment, and if it's culturally competent. So some opportunities that we see are improving the evidence base for action and customizing technical assistance. And improving the evidence base for action, that looks like, if there's a lack of sufficient measurement and evaluation of minority small businesses and capital environments, that also means a limited understanding of the scope and magnitude of the barriers that they face. So that limits, opportunities to target and mobilize public and private resources. When it comes to customizing, businesses aren't bankable without sound operations, attention to business fundamentals, and financial illiteracy limits capital opportunities. So technical assistance programs are not necessarily tailored for minority entrepreneurs and small business owners, but we're learning how to get there slowly. So there are some structural, but also psychological barriers that we want to touch on. And what is behavioral science? So it sounds kind of fancy and a little bit intimidating at times, but it's really just studying human behavior. The field usually takes from various social science disciplines, understanding causes of individual, group, and organizational behavior, and it's a lot based in theory. But applied behavioral science combines a lot of these cross-disciplinary insights and methods to understand how people behave, mainly through experiments in the lab and field, and using those findings to shape policy and impact practice. It's currently being used in a lot of different fields, in especially marketing and consumer behavior, but also across the gamut to health and wellness. In the last year, even, there's been a lot of talk of, behavioral science and behavioral economics in public health, and finding different nudges to get people to do certain behaviors like social distancing, sanitizing your hands, wearing a mask, and you're probably also applying it in ways you don't even realize. So when it comes to the small business owner, Lisa, can we go to the next slide? Thank you. So this just kind of goes to show that the decision-making process isn't a linear process. It's not 1 + 1 = 2 situation, and it can get really messy. When we think about how we make decisions, sometimes you think it's time plus money plus resources, the building blocks, but there's a lot, and there's a variety of other factors that influence the decision-making equation, like, the situation, urgency, stress, or other factors like culture, financial literacy, the experience of the peers around you, and more. So on top of this already complex process, we have our heuristics and biases, which influence the ways that we think and that we make decisions. So heuristics are mental shortcuts that allow us to solve problems and make judgments quickly and efficiently. So they're those rule of thumb strategies that you don't really think about, and we've picked up in our lives to shorten decision-making times. They help us, function more effectively, usually, so that we don't have to stop and pick apart every aspect of our decisions, so that they can become a little bit more automatic. And they're really helpful in a lot of situations, but they can also lead to these cognitive biases that you see hovering around, the factors of your decision making. So cognitive bias is basically a processing error that happens, when your brain's trying to take in all this information from the world and you're trying to simplify it to be able to make a decision. But it can get rerouted by problems having to do with memory, attention, attribution, and other mental mistakes. So you can see some of these, which you might already know, like confirmation bias. I think that's pretty something that we've all learned in the last couple of years, at least. And then maybe some new ones like the labor illusion, which is valuing something more if you think that more labor was actually put into it. There's loss aversion, which is a tendency where people try to prevent losses even more than they try to make gains. You can also see like goal gradient hovering around time, which is that people will generally work harder to achieve a goal as the goal gets closer to them. So I'm sure you can already start to think of some ways that these might apply in your day-to-day or your interactions with small businesses, but starting to understand these is just the start of the solution. So this is where the nudge comes in, and this is the applied research part where we have to think and do. So nudges are interventions that aim to change behavior in predictable ways, mostly micro interventions to create macro changes. And unlike traditional policy interventions, they don't use mandates, bans, or economic incentives. They're usually low cost, can be avoided, and they don't eliminate other options. So I see that someone mentioned Nudge is a good book by behavioral economists, which is very true, and something that they love to really describe it as is changing the underlying choice architecture that someone faces, rather than saying like, hey, like I have a better option for you. So in our context, like what would that look like? I've put together some brief studies. So there are a number of organizations that are doing this work, but when we think about implementing nudges in a public policy space, the White House Social and Behavioral Sciences team has done a little of this to show how they can be done on a really large scale. So when it was launched in 2014, and their goal was to translate insights from behavioral science research into improvements in federal policies and programs. So as you can see here, they partnered with the Department of Defense and conducted this nudge experiment to try to increase savings for military service members through email prompts. So people who weren't enrolled in their retirement plan, but we're losing money because of it. So when they put this like nudge through the entire group, And the control group didn't get any nudge, so they didn't get any emails. It was a business as usual practice, but then the nudge group received emails nudging them to contribute to their savings. And as you can see, the nudge groups had a higher enrollment rate than the control. Over 4,800 people enrolled, and contributions increased by over 1 million within a month. And the next one shows a little bit more. This nudge is a little bit more to encourage borrower action. So the same White House group partnered with the USDA to promote microloan take-up for small-scale farmers, and they were sent outreach letters detailing customized steps for applying for a microloan and personalized contact information for their local loan officers. So if you've done any kind of marketing, you can kind of like start to see how that filters in, like things like knowing your audience, customizing your strategies, streamlining the process, so that like they're more likely to take on whatever it is that you're offering. And the results show here that that does show you're more likely to obtain a loan. And then we have one more study here that is nudging to encourage borrower action. So they partnered with the Department of Education to prevent federal student loan borrowers from defaulting on their loans. And they, as you can see, like the targeted messaging worked. There we go. So within the first week, even the reminder email led to almost a 30% increase in the fraction of borrowers that were making a payment. And so they did a couple of different things. They tried emphasizing the consequences of inaction, which generated 41% more calls to the representatives than emails emphasizing the benefits of taking action. But then scheduling borrowers to call in at specific appointment times increased the call-in rate more than the email emphasizing consequences to inaction. So not all nudges are made equal. So we can always hypothesize, but given different situations, the response to the nudge will vary, and some will always be more effective than others. And so we've yet to see the presence of really strong and clear nudges within small business TA. There is some research that's in the adjacent realm of personal finances, but we want to tailor these strategies for the small business community and for the service providers that support them. So this is a basic visual we've developed in our own research work to show the structure and the flow and where we see nudge applications fitting in. We also intend to use this in partnership with service providers who are interested in applying nudges through pilot programs. And with that being said, we have a poll for you because research is amazing, but designing programs from like the ivory tower doesn't make much sense for the actual front lines that carry it out. Lisa
Ivana, can I stop you before you go into the poll? Can we go back to the last slide?
Yeah, of course.
Because we have an example, and maybe you could give us, we have an example of something we're using at Cameo, is that, so the California Relief Fund, that's the loan fund, people were either matched with a lender or not matched with a lender. If they weren't matched with a lender, we sent them out an email with more resources, basically. And we didn't get a very good response back. Well, part of that was timing. It took 5 months to do it. So, I mean, people who applied 5 months ago probably even forgot what that was. There's probably 20 other things. But so do you have any, so that was kind of like an info nudge, I guess, is what you're saying, is like, hey, here are the options that you can take. And we got a very low response rate, I would say. Are there other nudges we could have done? Like, I guess we could set them up with a call or something like that, or something.
I think in that case, setting them up with a call kind of hones in on pre-commitment, which does urge people to, get past that inertia or the procrastination phase. And also sometimes the information nudge is good, but at the same time, you also run the risk of decision paralysis, which is, like when given too many options, people tend to make the easiest decision, which is not to make any decision.
Yeah.
It's kind of your default bias. Yes. But I mean, I love the idea of it. I think also though, with nudges, we do have to be pretty careful because every organization is different. The processes are different. The way you can like map out and blueprint your customer service or your counseling and everything, I think has to be tailored. We are trying to see how that can be scaled or applied to most organizations. So this is just like a kind of bare bones look at like what that might look like. And this is what it looks like for some of our projects.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm. And so with this poll, we are going to pull I'm currently developing some potential interventions. I'd love to get, your sense of capacity and feasibility from the provider perspective. If you could take maybe 5 minutes to fill out the Google form that Lisa just shared in our chat, that would be greatly appreciated. And the results will be shared after this meeting.
So I see that Mega has a question in the chat. Do you see it, Ivana?
Mm-hmm. So it is quite a large and overwhelming issue. Obviously, there's no way for someone to like go in and really like knock out all of the different parts, like the different pain points. But that's something that we're trying to do now, which is, speak to everyone in the space and identify maybe the most common challenges that everyone is dealing with, especially when it comes to, like helping minority-owned businesses, and to kind of start with a few that we can prioritize that might work for everybody. And then if those have results and everything is improving, obviously we want to go back and start finding those like smaller nudges that can also make a difference. But this might be a little bit too in the weeds with the research, but I think even though it is a very large issue, something that we try to do is kind of break it apart. So starting with like the target behavior, rather than like, what are all these problems? Because we have a whole host of problems, but what is that target behavior that you want to encourage or maybe discourage, move someone to action or inaction, and be able to like reverse engineer the type of intervention that we would want to put in order to fill that gap, in order to overcome that challenge.
Okay, so it looks like we have about 10 responses so far. So I'll just give people a couple more minutes to fill that out. And if you have any questions for Ivana while we wait, feel free to drop it in the chat. This is a good time to do that. If not, I can just play some more music. Okay. So we're about 14 people in. So we'll probably give everybody about another minute, and you have the link, so throughout the meeting you can also, fill it out so that we can just continue moving forward. And you have to start a dance party. We'll have to do the matching moves.
Chair dancing.
Yeah. I wonder if that's going to be a new thing.
Incorporate dance breaks into all the Entrepreneurship Advantage meetings moving forward.
Yeah. Okay, so we have about, let's see, we have 16 responses. How do you feel about that, Ivana? Do you want to move forward to the small breakout rooms next, or do you want to give people another minute to fill it out?
I think we can probably keep going. Obviously, we will share the results of the poll afterwards. So if you do want to fill it out after the meeting, that still works. But yes, otherwise, we will be splitting into small groups. I'd love to give everyone a little more time also to discuss our own experiences when it comes to these psychological or structural barriers and the lessons we've learned in trying to find solutions for them. So the questions that we came up with are mainly getting at target behaviors that I just mentioned from either the client side or the service provider side, so that we can start identifying those pain points and the intention action gaps that we have to fill. So each group will have about 2 questions, more if time allows, and you'll have 10 minutes before we come back to the larger group to discuss some of your key takeaways. And you can also designate someone from your group to share when we come back.
Yeah, thanks, Ivana. So Heidi's going to magically send you over to the breakout rooms, but I do just want to preface to make sure to be conscious of the time so that everybody has a chance to answer. So make sure you answer in bullet point format so that the note takers who are the leads of each of the groups can have a chance to write down notes. And we'll see you back in 10 minutes.
I think, let me see. I think we have a discussion slide with a few more questions, like additional questions, but just ignoring them for now.
Okay, then I'll stop share.
What were some things, I would love to hear from some of the groups, what were some things that you found interesting or insightful in speaking with your group? And are there like any commonalities that you were surprised by? Yeah, I would love to, just get a sense of maybe some of the insights you've gained from your group. And I think actually, if anyone from my group wants to start, like, I know who you are, but if you don't want to share, I can also share what we talked about. Anybody?
Ivana, I think you could handle it. I think you're doing a fabulous job. So continue, please.
Okay, thank you, Daniel. So one of our main questions was, how would you describe a successful provider, counselor, and client interaction? And what about it makes it a successful interaction? What about it makes it an unsuccessful interaction? And what are some observable characteristics or behaviors that define it? So I think some things that we have felt are, like successful is when a client comes in and the counselor is immediately able to build rapport, or the client can already knows like what challenge they're trying to solve. And when it's unsuccessful, sometimes it's decision paralysis. Like Carlo had mentioned, when someone comes in and doesn't necessarily, maybe doesn't know what they want just yet, and they have so many options and can't decide. And then other ones are when clients come in and maybe feel like they're disappointed, their expectations weren't met. And we have kind of agreed that these are both a mix of structural and psychological barriers. But Selena from LISC also touched on some really great things, which are, interactions are successful when the business counselor can prompt a nudge and the client follows through based on that, and also, is focused on tailoring needs to the client and not assuming that one size fits all. Yes, in the interest of time, I would love for any other groups to take the floor and share.
I think our group leader, Lindsay, should do what you just did. That was a great example, Ivana.
Thank you.
Thanks, Richard. That's very kind of you to put me on the spot. We had a great discussion in our group. We actually ended up all being lenders. And so we had a lot of things in common, and we talked about how to build trust with our clients. And since that's very important in the financial industry, especially when you're working with minority clients, I think that some clients are pretty hesitant to maybe approach a lender and things of that sort. So we found that there are a number of different strategies that we kind of all agreed on how to build trust with our clients. And one of those things is just getting an introduction from one of your partners. And this is great. This is why we've created a community like this, so that if one of us meets an entrepreneur, we can do a warm introduction to another organization if they don't fit our lending program, because that kind of helps us build trust right off the bat. But some other things that we mentioned were the importance of, speaking different languages and having those available, and people who understand different cultures and who maybe look like the clients they serve. It can make people feel very comfortable and automatically build that trust. Another thing was just not jumping into business right away and really understanding the small business owner and talking and learning a lot about their business, and not just asking, for the last 3 years of tax returns or something of that sort right off the bat. We talked about relationships and just having their best interest in mind, maybe connecting them to a TA provider if they need help with credit or something of that sort. And having those type of relationships. We also talked about how there were a lot of barriers for us when it comes to kind of building that trust. If we're funded by like the SBA or a government organization, some people might be hesitant. So it's important to kind of be clear about, what our intentions are and things of that sort when we're talking to our clients. So we had a great discussion. We didn't get too much to our second question, but we all kind of agreed and had similar strategies on really how to build trust with our clients.
If I can, I'll just keep the trend going and then add to what Lindsay said. No one volunteered to speak from our group, but we talked a lot about building trust as well. And often, as someone, I was once a provider, so I know that oftentimes when we work with certain people or we work within communities, we think we know what they need, from the outside looking in. But, a way to build trust is to always ask what they want, and to just to assess their needs first before you proceed with anything. And then we also talked about to make sure we have the most accurate information so that we can provide the necessary resources. And then we also talked about kind of the importance of knowing what clients need, even when it may be difficult for us to know in a time like now with COVID and still trying to figure everything out. So that's pretty much what we talked about.
Hi, in our group, we had similar comments as Lindsay and Rashay, but the question is, what makes characteristics of a good success story from a client perspective? And what we discuss is probably how detail-oriented the client is, how ready they were to apply for the loan, make sure they had all the documents before he applied the loan. He knew how the money was going to be used for. He knew the marketing in the area. He knew his potential clients. He had experience in the business. So we wanted to see this level of engagement that I think makes a good client, a successful client in the future. And also, we also discussed the facts like, the language barriers, as also was made it good, also more accessible for clients also to have more success also. That's all.
Okay. Hi, this is Frank. For our group, of course, we had a really good discussion. Of course, the time was short, but one particular thing that Rosia shared was that a successful interaction is when a client leaves a meeting with actionable items, and they also have the sense or the feeling of being connected, and they're willing to come back. And I thought those were really good. We all agreed on those things, of course. And then on the other side, maybe an unsuccessful interaction would be if someone had come, they've got big dreams, they have drive, but they also have lots of baggage, things that are unresolved that they need to resolve before they can move forward. And it was shared that, we all have experienced this. Someone may come, they're not quite ready when they first engage, but they might come back 6 months, a year later, they've resolved some of those issues and they're ready to focus and move forward. Of course, we didn't have time to go into everything, but I thought those were some really good points that we gathered during that time.
Thank you, Frank. Ivana, do you want to continue hearing from small groups, or would you like me to show the large group discussion? I know we're kind of running out of time, but I do want to let people know that Ivana is available to stay a little bit longer in case you do want to continue joining the conversation, but you're not obligated to stay if you do have other meetings to get to, but just wanted to give you a heads up that we could stay on a little bit longer for you.
Yes, so thank you, Lisa, and thank you everyone for sharing what you discussed in your small groups. I think we do have some more discussion questions. You know, this could also just be food for thought, or I'd love to continue the conversation with anyone who's interested. I just hope that this conversation has been valuable in understanding some of the nuance that drives behavior, that drives decision-making, how that applies in TA, and what strategies might help improving existing programs and client outcomes, and doing that in a culturally competent way. Also, my email is listed in here somewhere, so please don't hesitate to reach out. And like Lisa said, I'll be staying on a bit after the session ends in case anyone has any burning questions. So, I mean, I know, Lisa, you do have some reminders for wrap up, but I just wanted to say thank you again to everyone who joined and to the wonderful team at Cameo for having me today.
I would like to go back to that, those bubble slides, and talk a little bit about like the nudging and the like that, and how to nudge people, you know, or even the other one, the one before. I thought that was, these, are they both? Wait, go to the next one.
The next, they're the
right?
same. They're the same.
Okay,
bubble,
I see.
But yeah,
They're the same bubble. So I thought this was really interesting because, like, when a client comes to you, they have all these things, right, with them, and how to, you know, how to tease out and what's some of the, you know, I'm guessing a lot of people have stuff around money, right? And there's a lot of psychology around how people think about money and how think about you know, and then their stress and their home life and all that kind of stuff. So I don't know if like I'd love to, I wish we could put this slide up with the other questions, or maybe we could pop those last questions into chat, and like how they kind of, you know, how we can kind of look at this. I found this very helpful, this graph.
Yeah, and I think like this is also just an introduction. It's like the tip of the iceberg, because even like you said, money is one bubble, but money is a lot to unpack. And it's just kind of to illustrate that it's not a simple process. Even when you think of like smallest things, maybe not a small business example, but like if you are heading out the door and you know that you have your, you know, like a lot of things do. You need to maybe pick up your dog or drive to an errand, and also your credit card payment is due. Under normal circumstances, rationality would say like, sit down and do those things. But it's like, okay, under a time crunch or urgency, you're gonna be like, I'm gonna be out the door. I know I'm gonna be fined for a late payment probably, but I don't have time to do it. And certain things like that, where your normal rational decisions, like people don't necessarily fit into the rational actor model of economics. You know, you would think that you would always do things in your best interest, but sometimes you really just don't. And it's because of a lot of different things. So, I mean, even on this, when you see like labor illusion, sometimes if you go seek out a counselor or someone for assistance and they've done all this work for you, but you don't maybe have a physical packet, or they haven't told you like, I've done this, I've analyzed this, I've looked at your financials, I've looked at your current marketing plan, and like all of these things, like the small business owner might not appreciate it nearly as much as if they knew
Mm.
what kind of labor that was put into that product, or the labor that was put into those, that advice or that guidance that was provided. And yeah, there's a lot. I mean, if you want,
That's a great tip right there. Is like, just convey to your clients the work that you're doing to help them, and it's not just something you're making up off the top of your head, right?
yeah. And also, I think like Frank had mentioned, as part of his group discussion, like having a plan, being prepared when you walk in to seek assistance on what you need, and like, that lets you walk away with more. And like when you think of what's a little nudge that I do in my day-to-day is when I set a meeting, oftentimes I'll create an agenda, because I think we always have those meeting notifications that pop up on our calendars. We don't really know what's happening, and it's not always the best use of time. And so when you have a meeting, like even setting an agenda really keeps like the time management on track. It gets you leaving that meeting with like the takeaways, with actionable item steps, and like following up right after a meeting. Like those are all like little nudges that we might not even realize that we're doing in our day-to-day.
Yeah. Hey, Ivana, I thought I want to ask people, and you can just kind of use the reaction button. It sounds to me like a nice, interesting training might be to do some training on what those biases, like really go into deeper, go a little bit deeper onto what those biases are and how to work with those. Is that something people might be interested in the future? Put a reaction button if you think so, or else if I see one, I only see one. Okay, there we go. I see a few. I think that might be kind of an interesting training, like to take that slide and unpack it. Is that something you might be willing to do with us?
Yeah, I mean, that, as you can see, this is something I'm really interested in and really passionate about. Like anyone can feel free to reach out to me, and I'd love to have that conversation. If we can do a training and it can help the people in this room, I would be happy to do that.
I would probably take that statewide, so I wouldn't limit it to. Sorry, LA.
That's the plan.
That sounds like something everybody might be interested in, across the state. So,
I mean, I know it's it's noon now, and I know people probably have to jump for other meetings, but if anyone has any questions, I'm gonna stay here until there's no one here except me, Heidi, Lisa, and the Cameo team.
Thank you so much, Ivana, for such a great presentation, and I appreciate the extra time. So yeah, if anybody wants to ask any questions, feel free to unmute yourself and ask, or drop it into the chat. If not, we'll see you next month on July 22nd at 11. I dropped the link to register for our next meeting, as well as my email in case you have any questions. You'll be receiving the recording and all of the great information that you received today as soon as possible. So thank you. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.